Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another webinar for the Bison Brigade. And today I am joined by one of my, not oldest in like old terms, but oldest and dearest friends, Lisa Stonehouse, who is also
Mhm.
a spiritual chaplain. And she will be one of the keynote speakers for our Caregivers Conference coming up this April 26th here in Hudsonville. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm just going to read your bio here real fast, or a part of your bio, just to kind of give some context to everybody who's listening eventually. So it says here, Lisa Stonehouse is a pastor, loving mother of four, and has a passion for caring for people. With a deep faith rooted in care and compassion, she values helping people feel seen, heard, and loved. She leads with a heart full of grace, guides with wisdom, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to meeting people where they are. And just as someone who has been your friend since the age of, I think, 13, I know that these aren't just words, and I've walked alongside you during very challenging and difficult seasons in your life. So I know that you are someone who might not necessarily have walked a traditional caregiving role, but you have been in a season of extreme trauma. You've raised four children on your own and you've had to navigate really challenging things. So, could you just kind of give everybody an overview of what your story looks like? And then we'll dive into some tools and practices that have been helpful for you.
Sure. In 2016, my life kind of turned upside down. It really felt like overnight. It maybe was a 2 to 3 week uncomfortable. I feel like there's a shift and I don't know what to do about it. But it really felt overnight. My husband of almost 17 years left. And he had, it just sort of was Sunday, and I heard all of these things that I had no idea were happening. And then by Wednesday, he was gone. And at the time, my children were 13, 11, and 7. So those were my girls. And then my son was 5. And so, from what was a really wonderful parenting situation, that the two of us did a lot of that together. It overnight became single parenting. And so not just was it, I became a single parent, but it was, and caring for them physically, but it was the emotional needs and their spiritual needs and their physical needs and their mental. I mean, all of the things that brought trauma into their life in one moment, really. And so we did the hard work of healing and walking through that of counseling and therapy and wisdom from friends and deep conversations and pressing into the Lord and snot on the carpet, weeping and prayers and all of those things that make up the healing process and walking through trauma. And for the most part, life is healed and whole, and there's flickers of things that pop up. I mean, I don't know that you ever fully heal from a traumatic event in your life, but of the times and seasons of pressing into the Lord, of learning new facets of who He is, and seeing my kids thrive. So that's kind of my story.
Yeah, and how many years removed are you now?
9 almost.
Okay. Yeah, and I've seen you faithfully walk this journey. And one question I'll often ask to caregivers who go through either primary trauma or secondary trauma as they're caring for a loved one, we all have a mode that we fall into, like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I've said it's really helpful to understand yourself
Mm-hmm.
and what mode you tend to lean into as you're in a traumatic situation, because I think you're better able to process and kind of lift yourself up out of that mode if you can recognize whatever mode that is. So, what mode would you say that you tend to fall into in seasons of trauma?
It's interesting. One of my observations of myself with trauma, I would say with walking through a marriage that fell apart and divorce, I fought. I fought really hard for our marriage. I found something inside of me that I didn't. If you're familiar with the Enneagram, to anyone who's watching, I'm a 9, which is a peacemaker, where normally you're easygoing, you just, you keep quiet to make peace, but I fought really hard for my marriage and for healing. Um, and then when I walked through the trauma of my sister, her death, she passed away 22 months ago. And that was a whole traumatic event in itself. And I will say, walking through that, I went through a complete freeze. I just froze. Um, and so as I processed, like, why would I walk through one sort of grief and trauma with a fight? And why did I walk through one with a freeze? I don't totally know, other than I think I thought there was at least still some life that I could fight for in my marriage where there's not life and death. And so I would say both. I would say I've walked through, yeah, I've used both.
That's interesting to hear you say that because I always thought my go-to mode was fight. And then I started to reflect because of all the things like I've created. I kind of put my head down and just get it done and figure out how to create a solution. And then I noticed too, I flee. Like when times get hard, I'm just out of here. You know,
Yeah.
we moved numerous times and I'm just if it's not feeling good anymore, we just leave. And
Yeah.
then when we moved Luke into the group home, I went into total freeze mode for like
Mhm.
3 months. And that was a really uncomfortable space for me because it doesn't like align with who I am. And I could hardly move for 3 months. I was just done. But I
Yep.
think even having an understanding of what those modes are and what we need, what steps we need to take to eventually move ourselves out of those modes is really helpful. So, you eventually landed in spiritual care. You became a
Mhm.
pastor. Talk a little bit about how that occurred during this 9 year process of dealing with losing your husband and raising your kids as a single mom. And how did you eventually get into this role?
Um, it started when I was probably in my early 20s. I felt this thing inside of me that I felt like I wanted to care for people and I love the Lord and I just wanted to figure out how to do that together. And so I had someone pray over me, and it was just a really moving moment in my life of that there would be a role in my life someday where I would be leading people spiritually. And then 12 years ago, we started attending a church, Harbor Life. And up until that point, I had been a stay-at-home mom, homeschooled my kids. And they had a position open up that was 5 hours. It was a part-time, super part-time job to a part-time kids minister. And so I thought, oh, I could do that. And so I started that in July of 2013. And that job morphed into then I became the children's ministry director, and then a couple other areas that opened up. And then my pastor at the time, when my husband left, wisely gave me a year off and said, I want you to heal. And then when that year was over, he created the discipleship and care, which is what I do now. So I oversee the discipleship programs or the hearts. I kind of hate the word program, but like the things that we offer to help people grow. But really, I just want to step in your heart and walk with you as you learn how much the Lord loves you and help you take your story and connect it. And so it's that fine line of I don't know exactly what discipleship is, and I don't know exactly what the care part is. They just like mesh together. And then I started preaching, I think 5 or 6 years ago. So that's kind of my role there is I care, I do the discipleship, I preach. Um,
And as you're walking through, these years of really intense trauma, especially in those beginning days, what tools did you really rely on, or were you just in complete survival mode at that point?
I was in complete survival mode, but I will say um, I had worship music on all the time. That Lauren Daigle came out back then. I don't
Yeah,
even know the name of the CD. I can't listen to a song now without feeling really weird inside.
yeah.
All of a sudden it's like the smells and sounds of that. But her first album was super, super profound in my life at the time. Candles, that sounds so simple and silly, but I mean, I feel like I had candles and worship music on all the time and my Bible. I just had my Bible out because sometimes you can only make it 5 minutes or you can only make it 10 minutes. And so I just had it out. And it wasn't like I was sitting there pouring and like learning. It was just this desperate feeling of what does the Psalms say? I mean, I feel like King David is so raw before the Lord, where he's angry with God or he's desperate. He feels unseen. He feels like God doesn't care. And so he just pens it. He just says what he feels. And it made me feel safe to be able to say, I'm really pissed, God. Like this is so unfair. This is so wrong. And to have his word meet me in those moments of, okay, I can do this now. And it might, like I said, it might only be a few minutes or it might be a few hours. It's just like to have that refilling. I was desperate for it.
I love the example of King David in the Bible just because he seems so real and like there's so much passion towards God, but yet he was just a man who really struggled. Like he had so much
Yes.
passion
Yeah.
towards women who weren't his wife too. Like
Yeah.
he
Right.
he was a sinful human being who just loved God with all his heart, soul, and mind. And he's been such an encouragement to me too in those times of desperation and also noticing Christ's example in the Garden of Gethsemane when he's like lamenting to the Father and wailing out, I don't want to do this, Lord, or I don't want to do this, Father. This is going to be really hard. If there's
Yeah.
any way you can take this cup from me, please take it from me. And then ultimately surrendering and saying, but not my will, but yours be done. And I
Yes.
think that's where all of our trauma eventually meets, wouldn't you agree? Like in this form of surrender. And what
Yes.
did that look like surrendering for you? And then what was that movement beyond that surrender? Like, how did you begin to live again? Did you have that specific moment of surrender? And then once that surrender occurs, I guess is what I'm saying, you have to kind of pick yourself up
You
and
do.
make the decision, I'm going to live.
Um, One of my favorite Bible passages is John 15, which is the gardener and it's abiding. And I was in a small group that we called a huddle, and it started in January of 2016. So I had learned some of these tools before I walked through what I walked through. But in this huddle, we learned all these shapes. And so this shape is a half circle, and where you learn to abide, which abide is resting in God. And your abiding might look different than mine. Abiding could be walking, it could be gardening, it could be um, reading a book, learning about the Lord, a candle, music, just something where your heart is quiet and resting before the Lord. And I learned what abiding was in such a way. And in that abiding, I learned to surrender. I couldn't do anything. It didn't matter. I mean, I prayed, I begged God. It was something that, I mean, God loves marriage. He loves faithfulness, but it didn't matter what, what I did, but I learned that abiding in God, it changed the posture of my heart to learn to surrender. And then from that abiding, you go to pruning. And when you hear the word prune, it's such this like you instantly think of hedge clippers or just going at it. And pruning is actually this tender, loving, intentional thing. And I'm not a gardener, but I do love picking the little deadheads off my plants, whether it's outside or in the house. I love doing that. I was just at my daughter's apartment and her plant needed some pruning. So I was like, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna pick at your plant while we chat. But it's this tender, intentional thing so you can grow. And then you grow and then you bear the fruit and so that growing and then you go back to the abiding and the pruning, so it's this almost like a pendulum. And the that surrender piece comes when you abide. I don't know if you learn how to truly surrender without that abiding of learning the heart of God is for you even if what is going on around you is chaos and pain and agony and trauma, where you just want it to stop. It doesn't always. A lot of times it doesn't, but in your heart, that's where you have to find the quiet abiding and the quiet surrender.
Do you feel comfortable sharing with everyone what that moment or what those moments of abiding looked like for you personally? Because as you were even giving examples of walking, I was like, oh, that's where I abide most
Yeah.
days. Like
Yep.
I have to go for my walk
Yeah.
without my cell phone. For like 30 minutes. And then the Lord and I have this deep conversation. And I've also shared with you my prayer mat every morning. I lay on my prayer mat and I invite Father, Son, and Holy Spirit into my day. So,
Yeah.
what does that abiding look like for you?
I would say for me also walking is huge. Walking and painting the walls of my home. You never know
Oh,
what color they're going to be. Jess and I were just talking.
yes,
She's painting and I love painting.
yes.
But in I can think then, like things are quiet. Nobody bugs me when I'm painting. Um, and walking, I would say the breath prayer is a really huge. I think sometimes we get prayer mixed up. We feel like we have to have these long, elaborate things that, we have to sound smart. We have to sound like we want to surrender. We have to sound like we have all these, things orderly, but God just wants our heart. And in that breath prayer is just where you breathe in, like, God, I trust you. And you can breathe out no matter what happens. Or, Lord, you're my shepherd, and breathe out, I'm not gonna want. Um, and so to find, or you could breathe in the, Lord, I know you love me. And then breathe out, help me to understand that. And I would say that practice for me was really, really helpful and profound. If you go to Pinterest and you look at breath prayer, there's so many wonderful scriptures that you can breathe in and breathe out. And it's just that steady rhythm of that. I have a Apple Watch and sometimes I'll get the notification where it says, remember to breathe.
Mm.
And all of a sudden you're like, oh my word, my jaw's clenched, my shoulders are tight. I didn't even know that. And so to take that deep breath and let it out, you just feel this peace wash over you. And again, that peace only comes, I feel like it only comes if you really learn to rest and trust and abide in the Lord because chaos will always ensue. Trauma will always be around. The things that call your name will always clamor. And I think when you quiet yourself, that is when you can hear his voice.
I bet, I mean, there's got to be even a neurological component to that breath prayer, I would think, in learning to slow your breath and slow your heart rate. Is there, it, is it like breathe in for so many seconds, hold it, breathe it out, or is it whatever works for your own body?
I think it's whatever works for your own body. Otherwise, I feel, and maybe if you love a regiment, I'm sure there's one out there. And I have read stuff. It's just the retaining. Like I know that neurologically, I forget if it's the amygdala in your brain
And
or I don't,
your type A friend needs like the formula.
I don't know.
What exactly is the formula?
I don't know.
So go to
But
Pinterest, everyone.
go to Pinterest. But yeah, I feel, where I would be like, oh, I don't know. Did I do that for 4 seconds or three? Which way is it? And I think it's just this like, just breathe
Right.
it in and then you release. And you can feel, I mean, your shoulders and just
Yeah.
your posture can go from being tense to relaxed.
Well, let's talk about that too. You were mentioning abiding and how you like to paint, and I was saying I like to walk, or in the past I've liked to do pottery. And as I'm picturing all of these activities, even painting, pottery, walking, like there's not a cell phone involved. So I think it's kind of almost eliminating all those distractions so you
So
can
true.
truly abide with the Father.
Yes.
Because if we are constantly scrolling on our cell phones are have become our idol, and we're not like giving our attention to the Father who is going to give us that peace that passes understanding. And then you mentioned too something I want to talk about that you and I have talked about privately recently is like the shoulders tensing in our fists. We've both had conversations about how our fists have been so tight, like holding on to control, and I think holding on to that trauma over the past year. Can you talk about that a little bit and how like learning to relax your fists, learning to relax your body, how that is a tool, and how
Mm.
do you get to that point outside of the breath prayer? Is there anything else that can help get you to that relaxed state of being?
That's a really good question because yeah, Jess and I were just talking about how I've had some peaceful things enter my life recently that I had been wrestling with and longing for a long time. And I think the some of it's the control. I think some of it is if I relax, I might fall apart. If I relax, I might not be able to protect whatever I need to protect. Um, and I had said to Jess I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, I said, I notice at night my hands are like when I lay down to sleep, they're not clenched or grabbing a blanket. They're just relaxed. And um I've been really thinking a lot lately about the verse, well, a couple of verses, taste and see that the Lord is good. Um, and I've come so that you may have life and life to the full. And I think focusing on those things of there is goodness in life, even when it's hard, even when it's horrible, you can taste and see that God is good. And he's come so we can have life to the full, which is such a meaningful verse to know that he has fullness of life for us. And earlier in John, he says, this is a promise that like nobody wants to claim, but the promise is in this world you will have trouble.
Yeah, nobody wants to claim that
Nobody
one.
wants that. I mean, I
Right,
want to, taste and see. I want that.
right, right,
But
right.
then he follows it up with, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome. And finding that taste and see that he is good in his overcoming and he's come so we can have fullness of life. That's another way we overcome. We're still going to have trouble. That promise is still there. That is not going away until we are on the other side of heaven. Um, but I think saying those things and holding those things and thinking about those things is what really causes that surrender. It causes the ability to open our hands um, because he's not asking us to open them and have them remain empty. When we open them, he fills us.
Oh, I love that. That's a good reminder. Um, can you give us a little glimpse about what you will be sharing at the Caregivers Conference?
Yeah. I actually think I'm going to talk about the rest and abide and prune and grow half circle because it truly transformed my life. It made me feel like in that season of where you don't feel like you're bearing fruit or you don't feel like you're growing and this pruning is going on inside your heart. It gave me such hope. And it taught me how to abide. And it taught me how to look at the things that give me peace and carve out time for them because it's so often when we're caring for people, when we're doing all of the duties that make up life, it's so easy to forget ourselves. And we need to nurture and care for our hearts and not in I don't know, allow the gardener to teach us how to abide, because that is where we find healing and that is where we find quiet. And we all need quiet and rest.
And that's so true. We have to be intentional about it. You know, I hear from caregivers all the time, I just don't have time. It's like,
Yeah,
well, you prioritize what's
right.
important and you are important and you have to make
Yes,
that time. You have to carve out that time. You have to find somebody who can watch your child or your loved one for 30 minutes so that you can care for yourself. It is that important,
yes,
or you will die and then you're no good to anybody, is what I
right.
will often say to people. So
Yeah,
being intentional is super important and recognizing your value. Um,
yeah,
you are valuable and you do deserve that time of rest and abiding and doing something good for yourself. Well, we
Mhm.
have just a couple of minutes here left. So, what would be your final word of encouragement or hope to weary caregivers as they are going about their days? What's like one small practice that they could try to instill today just to find some of that rest and that abiding that you've talked about?
Hmm. What you're doing is holy work. You are caring for people, a child, a loved one that the Lord loves so dearly. And He has that same equal love for you. And to, I just would encourage you to take those breaths, that breath in of, I am loved, or I am valuable, or I am seen. I think sometimes we just want to be seen. Hagar in the Bible is the first person who gives God a name. Hagar was the woman that Sarah used for Abraham. Sarah didn't trust God that the promise was going to be fulfilled, so she gave Abraham. It's a long story. She sits by a well and she is filled with water. And she has this moment where she says, "You are the God who sees." Where God sees you, He sees you in those hard moments where you are desperate. And so to breathe in, I am seen, or I am loved, or I am valuable. And your out prayer could be, God, help me believe that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this is encouraging to everybody out there, and I hope that we will get to meet you face to face at our
Yes.
Caregivers Conference on April 26th. So, thanks again, Lisa.
Thanks so much.